In this video, we'll set up remote access SSL VPN on a Sophos firewall. You may refer to my previous video on how I set up a Sophos firewall on Proxmox. Here is a network topology that we'll be working on. Basically, a remote user will terminate an SSL VPN connection to the WAN IP of the firewall and be permitted to access internal resources in the LAN. We have two goals. One is a basic or a minimum setup to get SSL VPN working and using the local database of the firewall in creating users. Second is somewhat advanced setup using AD and enabling multi-factor authentication or MFA. This firewall is configured with a WAN simulated IP of 192.168.8.210 because this is a lab environment, a LAN IP of 192.168.1.1, and a DMZ IP of 10.10.10.1. Let me show you the network interfaces of this firewall. The firmware on this virtualized Sophos firewall is at version 21, which is the latest at this time of recording. We go to network. Port A is in the LAN zone with a static IP of 192.168.1.1 with /24 subnet mask. Port B is the internet-facing interface which belongs to the WAN zone with static IP of 192.168.8.210. There is a secondary IP which I believe I used for that video about port forwarding. You may check it out. Port C is on the DMZ with an IP of 10.10.10.1. Port D is another WAN port, and this is used for another purpose. One more thing, let me expand this port A. I have VLAN 10 on LAN zone with an IP address of 192.168.10.1 with /24 subnet mask. This is for the file server which belongs to this VLAN 10 network. Back in the topology, here is that file server with an IP address of 192.168.10.100. This is just a Windows machine acting as file server that I have shared folders enabled for SMB access. The rest of the devices in the LAN are on 192.168.1.0/24 network. I have a Windows 11 on 192.168.1.10, which we can test for RDP connection. A Kali Linux on 192.168.1.70 with SSH enabled. A Linksys switch that we can manage on 192.168.1.205. A server 2022 machine on 10.10.10.220 belongs to the DMZ, which is hosting the AD or Active Directory that we will be using as the authentication server. We'll jump to Sophos Firewall Web Management. I'm accessing this firewall over the WAN IP 192.168.8.210. Default web management port is 4444. We go now to Remote Access VPN and see our options. There are a couple of Remote Access VPN options that we can configure, including IPsec, SSL VPN, L2TP, PPTP, clientless SSL VPN, and IPsec Legacy, but we'll mainly focus on these two here, SSL VPN and clientless SSL VPN. We go to Authentication and create a group and user in the firewall local database. We'll use the group or user for the SSL VPN. Go to Groups, click Add. I'll name this group SSL VPN Group. Add a description. I'll put here this group is for SSL VPN users. Select normal for the group type. We can apply some policies to this group. For the surfing quota, which we can allocate internet access time or duration, we have some default policies to select. Let us look at the unlimited internet access policy. We have unlimited validity and unlimited maximum hours. We can also add a customized policy and select the options that will see fit our needs. But for now, we'll go for this unlimited internet access. For the access time, this will allow or deny a connection based on a scheduled period. We have some default policies. Let us take a look at this allowed only during work hours policy name. It is set to allow with schedule of work hours 5 days a week. We can change also the schedule. We can also add a custom access time policy and select whatever we wanted to achieve. For now, we'll go for allowed all the time. Basically, we are allowing everything here for this group. For network traffic, we can control the amount of data transfer. Let us take a look at this 100 MB total data transfer policy. The restriction is based on total network traffic. There's an option here to restrict by individual network traffic, upload and download. A couple of cycle options. The maximum network set for this one is 100 MB. Again, there's an option to add a custom policy. I'm just showing what are the settings we can select. I'm not applying any network traffic and go for none. For traffic shaping, this will allow us to guarantee or limit the bandwidth. There are some default traffic shaping policies to choose from. We'll look at this high guarantee user policy name. Policy association is users since we are under this group and applied to users. Rule type here is guarantee and we have a limit option. We can set the upload and download as separate when enabled, but this one is disabled. Priority is 3. We can set the QoS levels. The guarantee is set to 512 kbps and limit is 2048 kbps. Individual is selected for the bandwidth usage type and we have option to use shared. Custom traffic shaping can be created as well in here. No need for now and select none. For the SSL VPN policy, there is nothing to select in here since we have not created one yet. Same goes with clientless SSL VPN. For the rest of these settings below, I leave it as default. Click Save. The group name called SSL VPN group has been added. Now we go to users and create one. Click Add. Enter a username. I'll just put here SSL user. The name of this user is SSL user. Add a description if needed. This user will be just a regular user. Select user for the user type. Enter a password and ensure to comply with the password complexity. For the email, this is required and main uses for quarantine summary when you have email server set up. Even though there is none, we'll just put something here. SSL user at test.com. For the group, look for the SSL VPN group name we just created earlier and select it. These policies below, surfing quota, access time, network traffic, and traffic shaping will follow what we have set on the group. No SSL VPN policy to select again because we have not created anything yet. For the rest of the config, we'll leave it as default. Click Save. We just created a user called SSL user, and it is a member of the SSL VPN group. Let us go to Remote Access VPN and select SSL VPN. Under SSL VPN, let us click on this SSL VPN Global Settings. We can select the protocol either TCP or UDP. It says select UDP for better performance. When the application traffic passing over the SSL VPN is mainly VoIP or video streaming, we can go for UDP. But for now, we'll stay on TCP. For the SSL server certificate, the default certificate selected in here is the appliance certificate, which is the auto-generated self-signed cert of this firewall. When you have a signed cert from a trusted CA, upload that certificate by going to Certificates. I'll open a duplicate tab and let me show how to navigate to the Certificates section. Under Certificates, we can find in here the self-signed cert called Appliance Certificate. To upload a certificate, just click this Add button. We can name the certificate, select the file format, then look for the file. If there is a private key that came with it, and passphrase or pre-shared key, you can fill this out as well. Once uploaded, ensure you get this green checked icon, meaning it's trusted. If not, you may require to upload the root CA and intermediate CAs in the Certificate Authority section here. I don't have a signed certificate from a trusted CA and will stick with the appliance certificate. We may get some warning about privacy later, but this will not prevent us from connecting. Override hostname. We can put an IP address or hostname or FQDN in here. SSL VPN clients or remote users will connect to the IP address or FQDN. We'll leave it blank as default, and I'll explain about this later. The default listening port that the firewall will accept connection for SSL VPN is 8443. You can change this port number as long as there is no conflict and not blocked by the ISP. The default IPv4 network subnet for SSL VPN is 10.81.234.0 with /24 mask. The firewall will assign an IP address within the subnet range to the connected SSL VPN remote client or user. We also have IPv6 network range in here, and we can select the lease mode, IPv4 only, or both IPv4 and IPv6. But our lease mode that will go for now is IPv4 only. There is an option to enable the use of static IP addresses. We can enter a DNS IP, whether internal DNS or public DNS that the remote client will get. I'll just put a Google DNS 8.8.8.8 in here. There's an option to add WINS, an option to add a domain name. This is the DNS suffix that will be added to the SSL VPN remote client network adapter settings. We have timer values we can set when to disconnect dead and idle clients. I'll leave it as default. Under cryptographic settings, encryption, authentication, key size, and key life can be set in here, and we'll leave it to the default as well. An option to enable debugging for troubleshooting purposes. I'll click Apply. We'll now add an SSL VPN policy. Click Add. The SSL VPN global settings that we have seen earlier will be applied to all remote access SSL VPN connections. It displays here some of the settings. including protocol type TCP. We did not configure override host name, it was blank by default. The listening port is on 8443. The IPv4 network address that will be leased to the remote user is on 1081.234.0/24. Leased mode is IPv4 only. These SSL VPN global settings can be changed, but we are good on this one. There is an option to configure this policy manually, but we'll do it via the wizard. Click Next. I'll name this SSL VPN policy 1. We can create multiple policies for different users, groups, allowed resource, full tunnel, or split tunnel. Next is to add users and groups. We can either select the username or the group name. I'd go for the group name SSL VPN group. In this way, whenever new SSL VPN remote users are created, just add the new users as a member to the group and no need to add it individually into the SSL VPN policy. Click Next. For authentication servers, the group and users were created in the firewall local database, and our only option is local. We don't have any external authentication servers at the moment. We'll go for next. For access to resources, this is where we can add an IP or network address that remote users are permitted or allowed to have access. In our topology, I'll allow this remote user to access any devices in the LAN. I could put the individual IP addresses that the remote user can access to, but I'll just put the whole network address of 192.168.1.0/24 and add 192.168.10.100 because this is on a different subnet. I think I have an object name already for the network address 192.168.1.0/24. It shows up in here. I'll click edit icon to verify and this looks correct. We'll search again and select it. For 192.168.10.100, it does not show up when I search. Let us create an object for it. Select IP. I'll just put the IP address 192.168.10.100 as the name of this object. IPv4 for the IP version. Type is IP. IP address is 192.168.10.100. Click Save. Go to Next. For the tunnel mode, we can select either full or split tunnel. We'll go for split tunnel on this one and select use VPN only for traffic to resources. For VPN portal access, this will open the web VPN portal hosted on the firewall on a specific zone for the user to connect on their web browser and download the SSL VPN client and configuration file. For the remote user to access the web VPN portal, they access it via the WAN IP. The user will be presented with a login page. Once they have entered their credential, the user can download the SSL VPN configuration file and Sophos Connect client, which is the application they need to install on their local machine, and import the configuration file to it for the SSL VPN connection to get established. We'll see this in action later. What we need to select here is the WAN zone. Ports B and D are internet-facing interfaces and a member of this WAN zone. The settings can also be changed on administration, device access. Let me show you where that is on the second tab here. Go to administration, select device access. For the WAN zone, SSL VPN and VPN portal under the VPN services column are both unchecked at the moment. This will get checked upon completing the setup. We'll go next. For SSL VPN access, this setting is about what zone the remote user can connect to the SSL VPN listening port 8443 of the firewall, which is also at the WAN IP or WAN zone. We are about to complete this and we can review the settings of this policy. Here is a summary of what has been configured for this policy name called SSL VPN Policy 1. We selected SSL VPN group, local for the authentication server. Here are the permitted network resource. It is in split tunnel mode. VPN portal and SSL VPN enabled on WAN zone. There will be an auto-created firewall group and rule, and we can take note of these names to check later. Click Finish. We have added our first SSL VPN policy. Let us look at the configuration. We can find the SSL VPN group name added in the policy members, and we can add another group or users when needed. The tunnel access method for this policy is split tunnel. When this use as default gateway button is on, it will be a full tunnel. We have permitted these network subnet and IP that this group or users can access. We can also add another network subnet or IP if there is a change in the network setup. There is an option to add IPv6 network resource, an option to change the idle timeout. No need to change anything in here. Click cancel. Let us check the auto added firewall group and rule. Go to rules and policies. Here is that automatic VPN rules group name, and clicking the plus sign to expand the group. If you notice, the firewall naming includes the policy name SSL VPN Policy 1. Double click to edit the configuration and taking a look at how it is configured. Action is accept. Rule group is automatic VPN rules. From the description, it says auto created firewall rule. Source zone is VPN. For the source network and devices, this auto-created object name IPv4 addresses underscore 4 underscore SSL VPN has been added, which is the SSL VPN network address 10.81.234.0/24. Let us verify again this SSL network address in the second tab. Go to Remote Access VPN, select SSL VPN, click on SSL VPN Global Settings. The IPv4 network address for SSL VPN is indeed 10.81.234.0/24. For destination zone, any is added, which means it could be in the LAN zone, DMZ, WAN, or any zones. For destination network, we have 192.168.1.0/24 and 192.168.10.100, which are on the LAN zone. For services, any is selected, which means any type of traffic, whether HTTPS, ping, or ICMP, SMB, SSH, or any protocols or ports. Match known users is checked, and the group name SSL VPN group is added into users or groups. In summary, this auto-added rule will allow the authenticated VPN user coming from the SSL VPN subnet range to access any services, ports, or protocol going to the network or IP set in the destination networks. Where do we find that SSL VPN and VPN portal getting enabled in the WAN zone? We go to Administration and Device Access. There seems to be a warning icon beside WAN. This is just saying that we are opening SSL VPN port 8443 and Web VPN portal on the WAN interfaces. Under VPN services, both SSL VPN and VPN portal are checked now. What port is this Web VPN portal hosted on this firewall listening at? We go to Admin and User Settings. The VPN portal HTTPS port is set on 443. We can also find in here the admin console HTTPS port, which is listening on 4444. That is the port number we use to access this firewall web management. Take note, port 443 is a common one, the default port for HTTPS, and this can be changed if there is a conflict or this is in use with other services. The self-signed appliance certificate is selected because I don't have a certificate signed by an authorized CA and expect a warning in the browser saying connection is not private when accessing the web VPN portal, and this will still work. I'm on this remote PC now, and the first thing a user will need to do is to connect to the web VPN portal and download the VPN client and configuration file. We'll open a web browser and connect to the WAN IP of the firewall on 443 or just type https://192.168.8.210. We get this privacy warning as expected because of that self-signed certificate. Click Advanced and proceed. We are presented a login page to this VPN portal. Enter the username, SSL user, and its password. This is the VPN client that we need to download, and it's called Sophos Connect Client. Windows and Mac OS are supported. We'll click download for Windows since we are on a Windows machine. Next, we need to download an SSL VPN configuration file. We have three options in here. We are not using Android or iOS, not using OpenVPN Connect v3 client. We are going to use Sophos Connect client, and we'll click on this first option that is compatible with Sophos Connect client. We have the two requirements available now on this remote PC in order to establish this SSL VPN connection, namely the user SSL VPN configuration file and Sophos Connect client installer. Next is to install the Sophos Connect client. Just launch the installer, check the box to accept the terms, then click install. Select Launch Sophos Connect and click Finish. We go to the hidden icons, and this is the icon for Sophos Connect client. Next is to import the SSL VPN configuration file. We click on Import Connection, find the file and select it. Notice the connection name defaulted to the WAN IP 192.168.8.210. And we can also see the WAN IP on 8443 TCP as the gateway. Before we connect, let us examine the contents of the configuration file. I'll open it via Notepad. Notice the WAN IP 192.168.8.210 and another WAN IP 192.168.250.99. Let me show these WAN IPs again in Network and Interfaces section. Port B has a WAN IP 192.168.8.210. Port D, another WAN interface port with an IP of 192.168.250.99. Both of these WAN IPs are in the SSL VPN configuration file. There is a secondary WAN IP 192.168.8.211 on port B, but this one did not show up in the SSL VPN configuration file. In the second tab, we are in SSL VPN global settings. Let me explain further this override hostname and what is the use of this. SSL VPN clients will connect to the IP address that we set in here. When this is blank, which is the default, all the interfaces belonging to the zone allowed for SSL VPN access will be listed in the SSL VPN configuration file. We added or enabled the WAN zone in SSL VPN, and that is why we see both the WAN IPs in the SSL VPN configuration file. We did not find the secondary WAN IP in there because it only includes the IP assigned on the main WAN port. This can be used for failover. If let's say WAN port B on 192.168.8.210 goes down, the other WAN port D will take over. What if we wanted to use only a specific WAN IP or use the secondary WAN IP on port B? We need to specify and enter that IP address we wanted to use for SSL VPN and override hostname. What if we don't have a static public WAN IP and the ISP provides a DHCP assigned WAN IP? When it is dynamic, the firewall supports DDNS, and that needs to be set up first. Then the FQDN needs to be entered in override hostname. What if the firewall is behind another firewall or router? Let's say this is the upstream firewall or router that has the real public IP address, and the firewall that will accept SSL VPN connection has the private IP address. Then we need to enter the real public IP address in override hostname. The upstream firewall or router also needs to port forward the configured SSL VPN listening port. I hope that explains the use of override hostname. These special use cases will not be covered here, maybe in the next video. Back at the remote PC, let us try to establish SSL VPN connection. Open Sophos Connect client. Click Connect. Log in with that same username, SSL user. Looks like we are connected. We got a green check mark. We are connected on this WAN IP gateway 192.168.8.210. VPN type is SSL/TCP. Click the second icon and we can find more details of this connection. Same WAN IP gateway 192.168.8.210 on 8443. The virtual IP address assigned is 10.81.234.2. The DNS IP assigned is 8.8.8.8. The remote networks that this remote user are allowed to access over the SSL VPN are the subnet 192.168.1.0/24 and the single IP 192.168.10.100. Let us take note of this virtual IP 10.81.234.2. We can find the connected SSL VPN user in the firewall web management by going to current activities. Under live users, we can see the SSL user. SSL VPN tunnel is the client type. The assigned IP 10.81.234.2, which is IPv4 version. We can see the start time. There is no upload, download, and data transfer yet. Let us now test if we can access the firewall web management via the LAN IP 192.168.1.1. In the new tab, I'll type https colon slash slash 192.168.1.1 colon 4444, the port number of the admin port. Looks like it is not accessible. I'll ping the IP from the command prompt. It appeared to be reachable via ping or ICMP, but not via HTTPS on port 4444. What do you think the issue here? I would suspect that HTTPS web management is not enabled in the VPN zone. We'll go to Administration, Device Access. The VPN zone is not checked for HTTPS under Admin Services. Let us check this box, click Apply and OK. Back at the remote PC, we are greeted with this privacy warning now, and this is a good sign that we can get to it now. Let us verify if we can log in. This is successful. We are able to access Firewall Web Management via the LAN IP over the SSL VPN from this remote PC. How about this Linksys switch? Can we access the web management on 192.168.1.205? It is accessible. Let's try Kali via SSH or port 22. I'll open PuTTY, type the IP of the Kali machine 192.168.1.70 and SSH to it. Log in with the Kali user credential. This is also accessible. We'll try RDP connection to 192.168.1.10. Looks good. This works as well. Last thing to test is SMB access to this file server 192.168.10.100. Looks like it is taking some time. I'll ping the IP to verify if it is reachable. Ping 192.168.10.100, and it is indeed reachable. Trying again, and this time it now presents us with the login window. We can view and access the shared folders. SMB access over SSL VPN is a success. Let me try trace RT 192.168.10.100. Notice the next hop IP is 10.81.234.1. This IP is within that SSL VPN range 10.81.234.0/24, right? The firewall auto created a backend SSL VPN tunnel interface that is ton0 with IP of 10.81.234.1. I'll do another trace RT to Kali Linux on 192.168.1.70. Same next hop IP 10.81.234.1. Let me show an SSL VPN traffic packet capture at the firewall. Go to Diagnostics, Packet Capture. Click Configure. In the Enter BPF string box, I'll type in here host 192.168.10.100 and ICMP. This will capture the ICMP or ping traffic from or to the host IP 192.168.10.100. Click Save. Turn on the packet capture button. Click Refresh. No log entry yet. So we'll initiate a ping to 192.168.10.100. If we click refresh, we got some entries in here now. The source IP, that is the remote PC 10.81.234.2, received by the SSL VPN tunnel interface TUN0 ingress, going to the destination 192.168.10.100 with packet type ICMP, goes out egress to port A.10, which is the VLAN 10 sub-interface. Matching the firewall rule ID 8. Go to Rules and Policies and verify if this firewall rule ID 8 is the auto-created one for SSL VPN. Looks correct. Firewall ID 8 is the expected rule for this traffic over the SSL VPN connection. We can see some traffic stats for in and out. We are done for this first goal, SSL VPN without AD, or in other words, SSL VPN using the firewall local database in creating and authenticating a user. See you on the next part of the video.